Hello Wargamers, today I want to do a video talking about probably the most iconic unit in the Tau Codex. Of that unit, of course, being the Crisis Battlesuit. So really I want to talk about what types of options you're going to take with these guys, how you're going to field them, and basically what you'll want to use them for in a game of 40k. So before we get into that though, I do want to say thanks for watching. If this is your first time to the channel, please subscribe, and of course let me know what you think of Crisis suits in the comments below. They have changed immensely over the past couple of years, and I'd love to get your guys' feedback on that. So let's get going here. Basically, one of the biggest changes with the release of the new Codex is that Crisis suits can now be taken in units of up to 9 suits. They are 22 points a model. Have the standard, the normal profile, right? Weapon skill 2, ballistic skill 3, strength 5, toughness 4, 2 wounds, initiative 2, 2 attacks, leadership 8, and a 3-up save. They are jetpack infantry, which gives them their notorious mobility and the ability to jump, shoot, jump. They come equipped with the Crisis Battlesuit, of course, which means that they have a black sun filter and multi-tracker. They also have the special rules supporting fire, as most Tau units do, meaning that they can overwatch for friendly units nearby, and also have the rule very bulky. Really does not come into play very often, but still something to be aware of. Right, so like I said, you can take them in units up to 9 currently. However, it's very rare that you would see that. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is once we go through the options here. But really, you're only going to see Crisis suits in maybe one of 3 situations. One, as a troops choice in a Farsight Enclaves list. They're going to be there for objective holding, basically. While other units like the Riptide do most of the damage and really do most of your work there. The second is going to be in a Death Star unit, which is becoming increasingly uncommon, both due to points limitations, but also due to shifts in the meta, things that are very easily capable of taking out a big unit of Crisis suits. So you can see them in a Death Star unit. And the third place that you're going to see them is in some of the formations that are in the new Codex, specifically the Retaliation Cadre, and some of the more staple units, or staple formations in the new Codex are going to have some Crisis component to them. Of course, if you're playing a Farsight Enclaves list, you have to take a unit of Crisis suits, so you'll see them there as well, but I'm not really counting that in the main 3. Or if you'd like, you can clump that in with that third one in the formation category. But yes, so you have a couple options here. You can upgrade, of course, to have 8 additional Crisis suits. The standard unit is 1. You can take up to 3 items from the ranged weapons and or supporting lists, which we'll talk about in a second. You can upgrade 1 Crisis to a Crisis Chazvray. Generally, this is not going to be worth it for you. You get 1 extra attack and an additional unit of leadership. However, if you're bringing Ethereal, that leadership really isn't going to come into play. A lot of time you have a commander with them if you're taking multiple units or multiple suits in a unit. You'll have a commander with them, or if you're using them for that objective grabbing capability, they're just going to have 1 guy there, so their leadership really isn't going to come into play. So generally the Sergeant upgrade to the Chazvray for 10 points, not going to be worth your time. Chazvray can take up to 3 items from ranged weapon, signature system, or supporting systems. Of course, that is one additional benefit of having a Chazvray, is they can take a signature system, but again, really not worth it in most cases. Any Crisis Chazwi or Chazvray can take up to 2 drones from the drone list. We'll talk about that in a minute too. And then the entire unit can take Bonding Knife Ritual for 1 point per model. Also, generally not going to be worth it for you unless you are obliged to do so underneath the far side rules, or obligated to do so under the far side rules. So if you have to do it, do it. Otherwise, having those the bounding knife ritual has rarely saved my crisis suits from obliteration. So generally they're either going to make it or they're not, and the bonding knife isn't going to make a big difference. So having that there or not, generally not worth your points there. So let's move on to the options, like I said. All right, and this is really where it becomes interesting. So you have a fair number of options for crisis suits, and that's one of their big strengths, is that you can customize them to a great extent. The first weapon that you can go with is a flamer for 5 points for 1 or 2 points for twin linked. Really just 2 flamers at that point. And this is really something that you're going to see more with a objective grabber unit. So here's your flamer back here. You can have it as an objective grabber guy, basically just deep striking in, laying down some suppressing fire, but really not expecting him to last long. That can be helpful. He can kind of clean up some units, particularly guardsmen, Eldar, Tyranids, Orcs. They're going to be able to do some damage that way, which would be nice. But overall, not going to be a major component in most lists. You might also see it on a buff commander just as a standard, a standard weapon to have on a buff commander in case of being charged, things like that. But normal crisis suits very rarely are going to carry flamers. You can take a burst cannon for 10 or 15 points. And burst cannons have an interesting role in that they're able to produce a large volume of strength 5 AP 5 fire, and generally that's going to be a job better done by fire warriors. Granted, fire warriors don't have the mobility or durability of crisis suits, but they're much cheaper, so depending on how you look at it, it might be worth your trouble to load out a crisis suit with burst cannons. And really, I would say that the only situation where that would be true would be in a situation where you are going all crisis suits all the time, or all battle suits all the time. If you don't have other sources of that, high volume of fire, then burst cannons are going to be for you. The next option is a fusion blaster for 15 or 20. Fusion blaster, your basic melta weapon there, of course with a bit extra range over a standard melta. They have a really nice role in a suicide squad, basically unit of 3, or a singleton that are dropping down with fusion blasters. Either 2 fusion blasters or a fusion blaster or plasma rifle can get the job done, although really I would recommend sticking with the 2 fusion blasters. You can outfit a unit of 3 with 2 target locks, so that you can fire at 3 different units, or alternatively just stick one guy with a target lock. That allows you to cover 2 different units, and generally you want to have a little bit of redundancy. So if you're dropping down a unit of 3, all of them having 2 fusion blasters, that can be a good way of taking out some closely packed vehicles. So looking at Eldar, looking at Space Marines, Guard, those are all going to be great ways to just get rid of some things quick and easy. Now, of course, with lighter vehicles, there's going to be a lot of other options to get rid of them, and fusion blasters are not going to be necessary. So keep that in mind. If you're expecting to see a lot of light vehicles, having fusion blasters may not be necessary. But if you're seeing a lot of heavy vehicles, and especially a lot of knights, then fusion blasters are going to be really a great asset to you. So you can have deep striking fusion blasters, and they can help deal with knights pretty well. Of course, there are other options for that as well, namely in the Storm Surge. He's going to be a good friend of yours in taking out knights. So while fusion blasters are a good option, there are other options there as well. fusion blasters are no longer as critical as they once were with the introduction of the storm surge, but still a strong tool in your arsenal. One advantage of fusion blasters over the storm surge is that they're able to deep strike in and kind of mess with the shielding positioning for knights. So it allows you a way to pose multiple options for that knight and which direction he's going to face his shield. And when you make your opponent have to choose, that gives you an advantage, as opposed to having all your units on one side of the knight. Makes that choice very easy for him, and also mitigates your firepower. Deep striking in fusion blasters makes him, forces him to make a choice and gives you a upper hand regardless of his choice. So that's one really nice aspect of fusion blasters. Missile pods is how you will see crisis suits outfitted more regularly. So if you've seen my videos in the past, you know that I frequently run a unit of crisis suits with 2 missile pods each. In the past, I've had them be accompanied by a buff commander, and that makes them highly effective and relatively mobile. So that's a great option. Giving them 2 missile pods each gives you a lot of different options. It makes them strong against infantry, makes them strong against light vehicles. They can even take out knights with the accompaniment of a buff commander. And so having a lot of missile pods can be a very well-rounded option, and that's probably why it's one of the more common loadouts that you'll see, is 2 missile pods each. So really a great way to do it. It also gives them the advantage of range, which is something that is important to crisis suits because you have some durability but really do not want to be caught up in a fight. So being able to stay at distance makes them pretty strong. Another option is plasma rifles. So plasma rifle back here. Really good against Space Marines. Strength 6, AP 2. Really nice ability to take out infantry units like that. However, it does start running into a little bit of an issue where it is most effective at shorter range, being a rapid fire weapon, and so there's a little bit of a trap of forcing you to move forward to use the weapon or wait until the enemy is very close to you to use the weapon to its full capacity. That makes it a little bit hard to use sometimes, particularly against things like wolf stars are going to be a little tricky with plasma rifles. Plasma rifles are very strong against Marine armies, but also leave you a little vulnerable to being charged, in which case you can't use a plasma rifle in close combat anyway, so you might as well, not have gone with it in the first place. But still a great option for very specific circumstances. Now, so with those are like the basic weapon loadouts that you can go with. You can go with double fusion, double missile pod. Those are going to be the more common loadouts for them. If you are doing the singleton objective grab unit, you might see them with just 1 missile pod or a twin link missile pod in order to reduce their reliance on marker lights or increase their ability to deliver hits independently. Those are all good ways to go. But there are 2 other options that in the past were difficult to work into a list. Now they are standard options, that of course being the airburst fragmentation projector and the cyclic ion blaster. Cyclic ion blaster being this guy right here. Basically, they used to be a limited 1 per army. Now they are standard weapons, so you could conceivably have an entire unit with cyclic ion blasters or an entire unit with AFPs and just be throwing out tons of shots. Now, there is a bit of an issue with that, and that is that the AFP really good against hordes. So if you're playing a Tyranid player with just a ton of Termagants, AFP is going to be great. Against orcs, it's going to be great. Against everyone else, it's going to be very difficult to use and doesn't have a defined niche. If you're looking for volume of fire, burst cannon is going to do a better job. If you're looking for high strength or low AP, plasma rifle, fusion blaster, both of them are going to do a better job. If you're looking for range, missile pods are going to do a better job. And so the AFP kind of sits in this weird, uncanny valley where it's really straddling the fence between different roles and doesn't have a defined role on the battlefield, therefore making it very situational and difficult to use. Generally not a good pick because of that. The other is a cyclic ion blaster. Cyclic ion blaster has very similar criticisms. It's not the best at anything really. It has some advantages situationally, but again, difficult to find a consistent use for it. I would much rather go with missile pods or fusion blasters or even plasma rifles over the cyclic ion blaster because I know what I'm going to get with it, and I know what it's good at. I know what it's not good at. It doesn't, straddle the fence here. It has a dedicated role, and I can use it in that role. Cyclic ion blaster doesn't. And so, while they are now available to a lot of units, they're expensive and don't fit well with the overall strategy, so I would generally stay away from them. Supporting systems, there's a couple different ones that you'll generally see. They do come standard with multi-trackers now, so you don't have to worry about that. That used to be the standard supporting system that you would always take multi-tracker. Well, now you don't have to, so that's great. Really, the things that I would consider taking on a crisis suit are one of two things. One, early warning override. If you have a unit with a bunch of missile pads, having early warning override can be very helpful. It gives them ability to intercept units that come in on reserve. And being a missile pod unit, they have a pretty far range, so you're not confined to the area directly around the crisis suit. You have some flexibility, and that means you're more likely to be able to actually use that early warning override. The alternative is a target lock, and this is something that you'll probably see a bit more. Target locks allow you to fire it separately from the rest of your unit, or at least at a different unit. And that gives you a lot of flexibility, particularly in large units or units that are mixed between crisis suits and marker drones. Or gun drones too, I suppose. But particularly marker drones are going to be a situation where you're going to want to use target locks. So let's talk about drones real quick then. Right? So you have three options with crisis suits. You have a marker light drone, you have a shield drone, and you can take a gun drone. Each one of these has a very specific role on the battlefield and has different situations where they would be best. Gun drones are going to be useful if you're taking a large unit with a drone controller and want to just have some ablative wounds plus a few extra shots. They're really not going to add a ton to the potential use for the unit, but they are going to put out some extra shots that can be helpful if you're looking for a lot of shot output, like volume of fire. So let's say you did end up with a unit with burst cannons. Gun drones are going to be a good fit for that. However, with missile pods or fusion blasters, gun drones really aren't going to have a place. Shield drones are going to be a good option for protecting a crisis suit that you think is going to be targeted with low AP weapons. Very often crisis suits will die to volume of fire, and so having a shield drone isn't necessarily super advantageous compared to just having either the two other types of drones. But in situations where crisis suits are going to be attacked by low AP weaponry, they can really save the day. So if you have a crisis unit, let's say again with fusion blasters that you know is not going to last long, but you want to make sure it's going to last at least one turn so that it can do its damage and earn back its points. Shield drones can be a really good option for that. They can help make sure that that unit gets the job done. The third unit, or the third type of drone, is a marker light drone, and this is the type of drone I prefer for most cases. Marker drones work very well in conjunction with the dual missile pod suit. Basically, you can have a unit of these guys, give them target locks, and throw in a buff commander with a drone controller, and that gives you a whole lot of options. Crisis suits benefit from a lot of the special rules granted by the buff commander, including twin linked, so they have a lot of damage output, and the drones benefit from the commander's ballistic skill, so they become ballistic skill 5, and of course twin link, so that gives you a lot of reliable marker light hits and a lot of damage output as well. So missile suits and marker lights can be a very impactful component of an army list. And so, yeah. So generally, I would stick with marker light drones, even if you are not doing the buff commander route. If you're keeping just some units with a type of drone just for some ablative wounds, marker lights are, really never in overabundance. You never have a surplus of marker lights, really. And so having more options for that, having a little bit of redundancy in your list can be a really good thing. So I would go with marker lights if you're going back and forth between which one to get. All right, so let's talk about how you might actually field these guys in a little bit more detail. Now that we've gone over the weapons, I think it's a little bit more clear about how you might see these on the battlefield. So crisis suits used to be a staple in my list. I used to always run this group of 3 suits because at the time that's the maximum that you could have, plus marker drones and the buff commander. Now I think it's pushed a little bit more towards the extreme. If you're going to run a unit of crisis suits, I think you're best suited running them again with this double missile pod setup, but having them in much more abundance. Having more suits with more missile pods means you get more benefit and more bang for your buck with a buff commander. So having a nice big unit, let's say 6 suits all with double missile pods plus, let's say, another 6 marker lights, that gives you a fair number of wounds and a lot of damage output. Also gives you a nice marker light battery to support your other units. Those other units are going to be things like Storm Surges and Riptides, your optimized stealth cadre if you have one. They are really going to be the superstar units in your army list, and these guys are great co-stars. But those same units are highly competitive for points and make it very difficult to field crisis suits in abundance because of that. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. More often, I think what we'll see is crisis suits really taking on a supporting role where those other units, Riptides, Ghost Keels, Storm Surges, really do the majority of the work. And crisis suits are there for what they do best, being good scoring units that can jump around the battlefield relatively quickly and deep strike as well. So having crisis suits in a troop capacity or through some sort of formation, getting lots of crisis suits in there for cheap, those are going to be your more popular builds right now, especially after looking at lists from Adepticon and a few other recent tournaments. It seems like that's the way the meta is going. So we'll see a lot more Storm Surges, Riptides, and Ghost Keels doing the majority of the work, and Crisis Suits taking on that supporting role. In that role, they're going to be best suited with, just like one missile pod or a twin link missile pod. I don't know how well, double missile pods is going to work. It's a lot more expensive, so then you're starting to invest a fair amount of points into a single model that may not be around very long. And so just giving them the one missile pod gives them a little bit of a offensive capability, something that is going to be a little bit of a nuisance to your opponent, but not something that's really going to weigh them down in terms of points cost. So what types of formations might you see these in? Retaliation cadres, if you're using a Farsight Dawnblade detachment, that's going to be another place that you'll see them. But really, I think that the Crisis Suit formations are not particularly attractive. More attractive are things like Drone Net, Optimized Stealth Cadre, Riptide Wing, things like that. Those are really going to be your main formations. So Crisis Suits really have fallen back into this supporting role. And that's not a bad thing. I really like Crisis Suits. The new models are amazing. Of course, these are not them, but the new models really have a lot of strengths to them. They're awesome looking. They're superposable, have upgraded weapon sculpts, which are really nice. And so I think that having those new models, having this revitalized role for Crisis Suits is really nice. You can do it all Battle Suit Army. It's not going to be all Crisis Suit like it was B and the D, but Crisis Suits are still around and still an important tool for you to have. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Please let me know what you think about Crisis Suits as well, what you've been using with the release of the new Codex over the past several months, what's been working for you and the like. So, thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming.